Good old Esther. Good young Esther. We're going to be in chapter 2, and couple of comments intro here, but we don't know the backstory on Esther. There's no hardly any detail. We know that she was orphaned. We know her dad's name was Abihail. That was Mordecai's uncle. That's from verse 15 of chapter 2. We know Mordecai raised her, so he's obviously older than her. The name Mordecai is an interesting name because it's not a typical Jewish name. And so, one of the things that happened when people were taken into captivity by these countries, especially in this case Babylon, or in this case Persia, idolatry. So Mordecai is actually a Jewish version of the word Marduk, which is a foreign pagan god. And so instead of calling him Marduk, which the Jews would have hated, they invented the word Mordecai as a kind of an option to that. It's kind of a derivative of Marduk. So that's how he got the name Mordecai. We have his lineage here a little bit. Verse 5, it says of chapter 2, the son of Zair, the son of Shimi, the son of Kish, a Benjamite. We all know the name Kish as the father of Saul, King Saul. But that's a problem. The next verse even talks about, in verse 6, Kish had been carried away from Jerusalem with the captives who had been captured with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away. That Kish is not the Kish, the father of King Saul. So this would be probably a grandson who is named the same name as his grandfather Kish. But that's kind of just so we know that Mordecai is coming from the line of Kish. We are told here that Esther's name was Hadassah, changed to Esther in the Persian version of her name. And so there's kind of some stuff going on here about who they are. Esther's parents died when she was young. Verse 7 tells us that. And again, Mordecai raised her. So between chapters 1 and 2, which are not in your Bible, between chapters 1 and 2, King Ahasuerus, remember his Greek name is Xerxes, led a campaign against Greece. And that was a 2-year campaign. He got defeated. He comes back to Shushan. And so chapter 2 is actually picking up the story when he comes back from this battle that he lost. And the first thing he does is, after these things, when the wrath of King Ahasuerus subsided, since he had 2 years to cool off, he remembered Vashti, what she had done, what had been decreed against her. In other words, his servants noticed that this king comes home and he's obviously lonely. So they cook up a plan, verses 2 through 4. This plan, of course, we're going to say, and it's part of the story, is a plan made by worldly men. Of course, they're going to do this, but what they don't know, what we all know from looking at this from the overhead view, is that this plan is going to change the trajectory of Esther, of Mordecai, and all the Jews in Persia by this crazy plan they're going to cook up. And so this is their own thinking. At least they would think that. We have to look at this and say, no, this is really God behind the scenes who's allowing and sort of stirring for this to take place. Let's read the plan. Verse 2, then the king's servants who attended him said, let beautiful young virgins be sought for the king, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom, that they may gather all the beautiful young virgins to Shushan, the citadel, into the women's quarters under the custody of Hegai, the king's eunuch, custodian of the women, and let beauty preparations be given them. Then let the young woman who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. This thing pleased the king, and he did so. So that's the plan. That's what chapter 2 is kind of about. And again, I just want to keep reminding us as we go through this text what's most important. We just got to remember again that God is sovereign. He's Lord over all people. He's Lord over circumstances. God always watches over his people. He's the shepherd of the sheep, in this case Israel. Later on it'll be the church, of course, addition to the church. Realize that God is at work all around us. He's stirring people. It's what he does. It's what he's doing here for his unknown purposes. Nobody sees what's coming here, causing decisions that are going to lead to his desired cause, which is going to be the outcome of the story. And again, we don't know where we fit into God's plan. I'm always asking the Lord to reveal to me what he wants me to do. I'm sure you do that. But I don't know how or when he's going to call on me to step into something that's his specified plan. I just know we're supposed to be ready, right? So we come to verse 8. Verse 8 tells us, so it was. That's an interesting phrase because it's unfolding something major here. So it was when the king's command and decree were heard, and when many young women were gathered at Shushan the citadel under the custody of Hegai, that Esther also was taken to the king's palace into the care of Hegai, the custodian of the women. So it was, meaning very well, there's an uneventful morning is taking place. You can imagine Esther waking up to a typical day, young. She's early. It's young. She's a young girl. But I'm guessing she's 15 to 18, somewhere in there. She wakes up and it's just a typical day. Mordecai's doing whatever he's doing. But an uneventful morning in someone's life can become an eventful evening, and that's what takes place. And this whole thing is going to turn into an undeliverable position because what's going to happen is going to be undoable. You can't change when certain things take place. And so she's going to be put into an undeliverable position, which is going to lead to this enablement of a miraculous, unbelievable blessing that's going to come into her life. She just doesn't know that. On this day, when all this takes place, it's one of the worst days of her life. And we don't see that in the text. There's a lot that the story doesn't give us, but she was taken by force. This was not her choice. What's his name? Josephus, who wrote Antiquities of the Jews. Josephus, the historian, said that 400 women were collected that he knew about. So you can just 400 beautiful girls. That's the criteria. Make sure they're beautiful. How do you trust a soldier to decide who's beautiful and who isn't if he's choosing for you? That's like when Isaac, Abraham, the servant was sent out to choose a wife for Isaac, and it's the servant who decides who to bring home. I always think that'd be a nightmare if somebody brought home someone and said, here's your wife, and you didn't like her. That's kind of scary. So we like to go online, look and think and consider, and that's how we do it today. In my day, it was look at the yearbook or look at the girl across the room, one of the two, and try to decide if it's worth my time, And I'm sure someone was doing that for me and thinking, man, that guy's ugly. But anyway, it just doesn't happen. So obviously, this is a nightmare of a day for her. Mordecai had to have been mortified, as a play on words, but he would have been because his lovely, beautiful young lady he's raising has been basically stolen. 400 girls. So this is a big day. It's a major event taking place here. So it was. And so all of a sudden a day changes. I don't know about you, but a day can change in a flash. It just takes one moment in time, a blink of an eye, for our life to change. Something happens, a car wreck, some kind of event. Did you see in the news, it was yesterday, a plane coming into land. And did you see the news? And a little plane was taxiing through, just putting along. And that plane was landing, got its wheels down, and had to lift right back up, or would have hit that plane. It was just a nightmare that didn't happen, thank goodness. But things can change in a second of time. And so this is one of those events where you don't plan it, and all of a sudden you're in a different world. Everything's changed. Your whole life that you know is gone. And suddenly you're thrown into this whole thing. And that's what's happened to Esther. Verse 7 tells us that she was lovely and beautiful. That seems to be the criteria of this text. You'll note in verse 9 that Hegai, who sees her, the custodian of the women, he was pleased with Esther, it says, and she obtained his favor. So when you read what he's done for her, verse 7, she's lovely and beautiful. Verse 9, now the young woman pleased him. She obtained his favor, so he readily gave beauty preparations to her besides her allowance. So she got more than the other girls. Then 7 choice maidservants were provided for her from the king's palace. So she's getting the whole deal. He moved her and her maidservants to the best place in the house of the women. So he's already made up his mind. This is the girl. 400 ladies, this is the one. I'm investing in her. I'm close to the king. This is going to happen. He's already made these decisions. So it's kind of a big deal what's happening here. Interestingly enough, that I read an article fairly recently in BBC Magazine, news magazine, and it was called "Would You Be Beautiful in the Ancient World?" And it was kind of highlighting Helen of Troy and all that kind of stuff. But this quote just grabbed me. I thought it was hilarious, but it's true. Quote, here's the quote: "The sheer number of mirrors found in Greek graves show that beauty really counted for something." This is back in the day. "Looks mattered to them. The ancient Greeks were," and the person said, "I'm afraid, were facist." It's a play on words from fascist. They were facist. They were all about themselves. And so this is sort of a cultural fact, true. And then here you are in Persia, same thing. We're looking for the most beautiful women to please the king, and it's all about that. So it's I think fairly understood here that you and I know there's too much of an emphasis in our culture on beauty. It's way out of proportion. A couple of things about this, because beauty becomes quickly tarnished, as you all know, and blemished by pride, by arrogance. When you get somebody who thinks that they're beautiful and wants you to know it, and there's an arrogance about that, looking down on others who aren't as attractive and beautiful, that's one of the ugliest persons I can be around. Would anybody agree with that? If that just robs the issue of beauty. Here's another thing, though. It's also true that sometimes those who are beautiful have to deal with the ugliness and the jealousy and misunderstanding of those around them. Because that's a problem in our culture. But one other thing's a problem, and it's this: those who are considered as beautiful have to deal with being rated oftentimes as less intelligent. I don't know if you caught that, but this just a couple of weeks ago, the Democrats were accusing Trump of having he just has beautiful women around him, but they're beautiful, non-intelligent women. Of course, they're down on Trump, of course, right? But it's just a jealous lie. It's not true. Matter of fact, some of the women that I'm seeing around Trump are scaringly intelligent, sharp, and bold, and that's kind of he's not afraid of that. So we're seeing that. But when a person reads a text like Psalm 139, which we all know, especially verse 14, if you read that psalm and you apply that into this whole thing, here's what it says: "I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works, and that my soul knows very well." Now, when we read that, it can have such a broad application for so many different people. If somebody feels they are insufficiently created, and there are a ton of people that feel this way, physical body issues, looks, not attractive, at least in the eyes of the beholder, they're going to have a tough time accepting themselves under this text. They're going to have a tough time with this verse. I've had people in my office who've really struggled with this verse. Well, hey, if God wove me together, if he made me and I look like this, God couldn't love me. Have you ever been up against that? That's a hard thing to deal with when you're reading what the word says, because somebody who's beautiful can look in the mirror and say the opposite. They can say, that verse speaks to me because I've been told I'm beautiful, and I feel that I am beautiful. And so, God did a good thing for me. And you're going to have that sort of response. But the person who's got a problem, a defect, perhaps when they were born, they had something wrong with them, they have a tough time with this when we read in verse 16, your eyes saw my substance being yet unformed. And they were in your book. They were all written, the days fashioned for me, when as yet there were none of them. So wait a minute, if God knew ahead of time, why did he let that happen? And so in this case, we're talking about beauty, And obviously, it's a problem because our society does not do well with this problem of beauty. I'm going to say that neither does the church. Years ago, I was directing a. I want to be careful what I say here, but years ago, I was directing a team of singers, and the second year, we were picking new singers, and they travel all over the country and out of the country. They're on TV. There's a standard. They have to look a certain way because of TV and because of all that goes with the politics of that. And so you're trying to pick and choose people who are talented but also have some attractiveness to be on TV. And I was told by the higher ups that I had to have this certain girl be on the team no matter what. So she came to tryouts, as all the other girls do that are getting scholarships, by the way. If you get on this team, you get a scholarship. So it's a big deal. This girl could not sing a lick. She had the worst voice I've ever heard, and she's like beautiful. She won a beauty contest in Lynchburg, and she was going to go on to other things. And so, but I'm being told she needs to be on the team. I assume a parent, somebody persuasive, was talking down through the chain of command. It got to me. And I'm like, oh, wow. So I'm complaining, like, she's terrible. She's not going to be good on this team. She's going to pull other people off pitch, blah, blah, blah. Didn't make any difference. So I toured with her for half a year. I just tried to figure out how to turn her mic down. So we would make adjustments so that she's on the team. She looks good, but we didn't want to hear her. So, and I didn't have the heart to tell her, you sound terrible. But your daddy or somebody wants you on this team, so I can't do anything about it. When stuff like that happens, it makes it very awkward. And sometimes in churches, we play this game like everybody else, and it's not good. So that's a problem. I felt I needed to say that because when it comes to measuring others by the issue of physical attraction, we all get in trouble because beauty sometimes is in the eye of the beholder. So, obviously we all can see somebody differently because we all have a different sort of taste in who we are. But we're all created in the image of God. And we have to, come to that point of understanding that what is the most important thing about my existence? Like, why am I here? What am I supposed to be for? And so I think every person that's a believer in Christ has to deal with that question. And if young people could hear this message today and receive this truth, it would really grab a hold of them, that God designed them for a purpose. And his main purpose in their lives, first of all, is that they, all of us here tonight, live for him. That's our first purpose. And then glorify him through what we do and who we are. That's it. So in 2 Corinthians 4, verse 7, the Apostle Paul reminds all of us about this issue. And he wants to remind us that this body is temporary. So he writes, but we have this treasure. Now, when he says this, he's talking about what is internally within us that he's writing about. Verse 6, he actually gives us what he's talking about. It is the God who commanded light to shine out of darkness. This is 2 Corinthians 4, 6. Who commanded light to shine out of darkness, who has shone in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. In other words, he says, but we have this treasure. So he's talking about a treasure, which is the glory of God in us, the glory of Christ in us, his presence and his glory. It's this light that's within us, and it works through us and shines through us. So he's saying we have the privilege of having this treasure, the glory of God, but it's in earthen vessels. And he wants to remind us of this, that the excellence of the power that we have because of Christ in us may be of God and not of us. What can oftentimes happen is sometimes our talents and our skill, our even sometimes just our qualities of who we are, our character, sometimes we can get caught up in who we are so much that we start performing based on who we think we are as opposed to who's within us. This happens. And it's a very common problem. So Paul wants to remind us that there's nothing good in me, but except for the fact that when I gave my life to Christ, I received this blessed gift of the glory of God in my life, this excellence of power. It's all about Christ. So faith in Christ allows us to have this sense of Christ's glory within. Paul wants me to remember I'm fragile, I'm temporary, I'm weak, I'm earthly, and there is a case to be made as I'm talking about how we look. I'm talking about beauty, really, but there's this case to be made that I think we all have a responsibility to look better than how I was born. I think we all try to look better. I don't want to present myself in the El Natural. I want to look better than that, and I want to please whoever looking at me, that I'm at least trying to look better than. If you saw me when I first got up this morning, you wouldn't want to see me. But I'm hoping that there's a little better presentation about that at the end of the day here. So I think that's important. It's just completely lopsided. All this to say, who we are is all for Christ. Now, we gotta remind our kids of that. Our kids growing up in a culture that tells them how they should look and what's going to impress people and how to look and how to act and how to be, and the world's lying through its teeth about who our kids should be, and we got to be careful that we can communicate this to our kids. They've got to learn this. Who we are is all for Christ. Okay, so let's go back to our text. Esther was attractive. She was good looking. We've got that covered. But I don't think that she necessarily knew she was good looking until she found herself in a beauty contest. I honestly don't think so. I think that this is just a case of Esther being Esther. She's being raised by a guy. She's living at home. She's doing whatever she's doing, and suddenly she's thrust into this thing. And it's so extreme that it was over the top. So Esther, who was already attractive, is now being forced into this program of pampering her, which was unbelievable. Verses 9 through 12 tells us how they did this. I already read 9, so let's press in. First of all, in verse 10, Esther did not reveal her people or her family. She followed Mordecai's counsel. He charged her not to do that. Verse 11, every day Mordecai, he's out pacing in the front of the court of the women's quarters to learn what's happening with her welfare and so on. Verse 12, each young woman's turn came to go into the king Ahasuerus after she had, look at this, completed 12 months preparation according to the regulations for the women, for thus were the days of their preparation appointed, apportioned 6 months of oil of myrrh treatments and 6 months with perfumes and preparations for beautifying women. Cool. A whole year. And myrrh, I've smelled myrrh. Myrrh's a nice smell. It's very strong, but it's a nice perfumey smell. But I don't know what they're trying to do here. Like after 6 months of myrrh treatments, does that mean you naturally smell like a myrrh bar everywhere you go? Hey, I don't think so. Sweat still happens. If then after the 6 months of that, then there's 6 months with perfumes of other kind and preparations for beautifying women. So if all of them were beautiful to begin with, they're supposed to be a lot more beautiful now after a year of this. Okay, so anyway, that's she's been thrown into this. This is not who she was. But suddenly she has to deal with this and figure out how to exist in this world doing this while at the same time being secretly a Jew. Because she didn't let that out. If she had been known to be a Jew at the beginning of this, she wouldn't be here. She wouldn't even be a part of the story. And this is where, sometimes when someone else reads a story and they say, well, Mordecai tells her to lie, be deceitful, kind of don't say who you are, keep it a secret. Somebody else would say we should be bold about who we are and not try to cover that up and make the application so screwy that, no, he's given her wisdom that we don't know what God's doing, but you've been taken without your will. You've been taken, so don't tell them who you are. He doesn't know what's going to happen to her. If they find out she's a Jew, they might have thrown her out the back door. He doesn't know, so he's just making sure she's careful. Okay, so here she is. She's in this situation, and the world, the world is all caught up in this thing of beauty. So the world is always, and it's a message I had to tell my daughter years ago, and even my son. You have to. This has to be communicated to our families that the world will always distort God's gift, no matter what it is. You know, if we're talking beauty, or we're talking art, or we're talking athleticism, we're talking musical talent, we're talking intellect, maybe you're an engineer, doesn't make any difference what your sort of basic abilities and talents and skills are. The world is set to distort that. Satan wants to use your gifts and talent, listen, to cancel selflessness. One of the things that he wants to do more than anything else is have you think about yourself. So he wants to cancel selflessness. So in the church, if a believer stumbles into too much obsessing about themselves, thinking about what I'm going to do, what's next for me to do, blah, blah, what's my life going to be about, and so on, to the point where you just are lost in that, that's not a good place to be. That's a very unhealthy place to be, because what does Satan want to do? He wants to stir up self-idolatry. That's exactly what he wants. That's what these folks are doing with these girls. They're trying to turn them into something that's so far beyond who they were. She was already beautiful. She didn't need to go through all this stuff. So, but the world takes these ideas and these concepts that are sort of injected by the evil one. You know, love yourself. As I remember back in the late 60s, early 70s, that was such a huge theme on everything that they showed us on TV. Love yourself. It's my time. It's my turn. You know, it's look out for number one. Take charge of your life. These are all self-motivating phrases. Maybe they're good to win a race, but they're not good to help others in the meantime. So it's a dangerous place, and she's in that world right now. So I want to shift gears for a second. I want to go to 1 Peter, because Peter gives a definition from God's perspective on beauty. And I think it's worth all of us seeing. And again, if you have sons or daughters, or even for ourselves, it's good to take this to heart. Because Peter is going to talk here about internal and outer beauty. And so he defines it for us, and starting in verse 1 of chapter 3. Wives, likewise be submissive to your own husbands, that even if some do not obey the word, they without a word may be won by the conduct of their wives when they observe your chaste conduct accompanied by fear. Do not let your adornment be merely outward. I like the fact that that's injected there. The word merely, that adverb, is just reminding us that it's not wrong to look nice. And even the Bible is giving us permission to understand that. But again, that's not the emphasis. So he says, do not let your adornment be merely outward, arranging the hair, wearing gold, putting on fine apparel. Some churches take that verse out of context and say that you should not ever have to worry about hairstyles or wearing gold or putting on fine apparel, you know, which is ridiculous. Some primitive churches do that. It's ridiculous. Rather, he says, let it be the hidden person of the heart with the incorruptible beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is very precious in the sight of God. For in this manner, in former times, the holy women who trusted in God also adorned themselves with these same qualities. He says, being submissive to their own husbands, as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, whose daughters you are if you do good and are not afraid with any terror. So first of all, he's just identifying here that this inner outer beauty thing starts with a chaste conduct. We're talking about being pure, being virtuous, being modest. These are things that I think are important. Verse 3 talks about adorning not merely outward, but certainly having an incorruptible beauty, that which can't be taken away from us no matter what happens. A gentle and quiet spirit, for example, he says. He reminds us in verse 5 that holy women, so there's a sense of striving to be holy, who trusted in God, did adorn themselves in this way on the internal side of things. Giving honor to one's husband and so on, yes. Then he goes on and he gives, he doesn't leave us out of this. So men, he talks about us in verse 7. And again, when he talks about this, there's this sort of overlying understanding here of adornment. This is what makes a believer attractive. So he says, husbands likewise dwell with them with understanding. Don't be a caveman. You know, dwell with your wife with understanding. Giving honor to the wife. Don't treat her like she's a second-class person in your house, like she's your slave. You give her honor. You place her in a very high position. as to the weaker vessel and as being heirs together of the grace of life. She's your partner. She's not a sort of like, oh yeah, that's my wife. No, she's your partner. She's right there with you equally, that your prayers may not be hindered. But then he talks about how the church looks in terms of adornment. Look what he says in verse 8. Finally, all of you be of one mind, having compassion for one another, love as brothers. We can always add in sisters, okay, girls. It doesn't mean you're left out here. You're my sister, I'm your brother. Love as brothers, be tender-hearted, be courteous. See, these are complementive qualities that adorn us. Not returning evil for evil or reviling for reviling, but on the contrary, blessing, knowing that you are called to this, that you may inherit a blessing. So Peter wants to make sure we understand this is what is attractive. When somebody comes in our church, the first thing that people see or hear is not the singing or the sermon. What's the first thing they see? How they're greeted, how our facility looks as they walk in. Is it dark and gloomy, or is it look like it's a happy, pleasant place? Are there smiling people here? Or are they all like creepy and frowny and they won't walk up to me and shake my hand or ask my name? Or I mean, there's all kinds of ways that people are looking. But here he's just saying, like, how we interact with each other is that which becomes the attractive thing. It's not our programming; it's who we are. And so he starts with obviously the beauty of a woman and highlights that what really makes her attractive, and then obviously for us guys and also the church. So that's what Peter's all about. The opposite of what we're talking about, the God's perspective on beauty. The opposite of that, it's just a phrase. I love this phrase. It's Proverbs 11:22. You can just take this, write it down, memorize it, everybody. This is really a good verse. As a ring of gold in a swine's snout, so is a lovely woman who lacks discretion. Don't you love that verse? I'm sorry. What makes that a good verse is because it's talking about judgment and behavior. The opposite of beauty is this grossness of attitude and self that becomes so obvious and so distancing because of what it is. So something that we all have to be taught and remember is what, this is one more verse that Paul gives us, is how we deal with all this is in 2 Corinthians 4, verses 16 to 18, because this is the principle by which we all should sort of live our lives today. He says to all of us as believers, therefore we do not lose heart. Do not lose heart. Even though our outward man is perishing, again reminding us of this frailty, this who we are. Every person has to deal with this. Our outward man is perishing, yet the inward man, hopefully, we're going to say, is being renewed day by day. For our light affliction, which is but for a moment, is working for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory. While we do not look at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporary, but the things which are not seen are eternal. Okay, so there's the principles that we should just sort of process when we talk about beauty and talk about attractiveness and so on. And back in our story, to just sort of finish this, I just want to highlight this verses 16 18 very quickly, and we're going to be done. Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus in verse 16 into his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth. Some say it was 479 BC, roughly. In the 7th year of his reign. By the way, in 465, he's going to be killed. He's going to be murdered in his bedroom. We're going to talk about that next time. The king loved Esther, it says, more than all the other women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight. I want to attack that. I don't have time. But when I read that, I'm thinking, okay, wait a minute. All we've read about Esther and this whole campaign is how she looks. And to say the king loved her more than the other women, are we just talking about a rating system here? He loves her because she's pleasing to the eye. She smells great, got all the perfumes on. I mean, what's the deal here? Is this love or is this lust? because this whole system is based on how she looks. The only thing that gives me any hope here is that it says she gained grace and favor in this verse, which, by the way, remember Vashti, his first queen, who, by the way, if we had a beauty contest between Vashti and Esther, Vashti at least is probably a tie, because the first two verses we're told that Vashti was a good-looking woman, and he wanted to show her off. So that's not the issue. So obviously Esther has something else going on here, that she obtained not only the fact that he can brag about how she looks good, but this thing of grace and favor in his sight more than all the other virgins. So he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king made a great feast, the feast of Esther, he called it, for all his officials and servants, and he proclaimed a holiday in the provinces and gave gifts according to the generosity of the king. So all we can take away from this particular thing, I think, is that there's this evidence here that there's more to looks here than what we understand. Esther obviously has enhancing qualities that are beyond beauty. Maybe it's just how God has wired her, designed her, but God is using her in this position at this time in history to gain something from the king that he would not give anyone else. The king didn't really care about Vashti. We could get that from what happened in the first chapter. The fact that Vashti couldn't stand being with him is another issue. So there's a lot going on that we aren't given here. But somehow we have a king here who sees something else in this woman that's in his life now. She honors him, evidently. She sought his well-being. We'll see that next week. She was obedient and gracious to all those around her. That's why she gained the favor of Haggai and other servants. So that's all in the story. So God has every intention of using Esther in her beauty, but also in other qualities that she has for his purpose and glory. And that's really the bottom line to chapter 2, is that God has an agenda that he's working through this historical event that's going to have an impact on his people and on Esther and on Mordecai. And that's what God's just choosing to do. Well, I said last week, while most of his people are off building Jerusalem and obeying the command to go back and do that and being faithful to that and fighting battles, you have a whole different issue here that God's allowed. That's a circumstantial thing that is a situation that would be unchangeable, but somehow through the whole thing, God's going to do something fantastic that only he can do. So that's kind of the story. That's why it's in the Bible. And the things that we have questions about that we can't fix or figure out, they're not important to us tonight. But what God's doing with this story is, and that's the story. And I'm sticking to it. Let's pray. Lord, your word is true. We are again reminded that you work through circumstances and time with all of us here tonight. You have an agenda for all of us, no matter who we are, how we look, how we act, what our character qualities are, what our talents are, our abilities. You have a design for us. You have a purpose for us. We know it's, first of all, to bring you glory, to be available, to be used by you in the moment when something comes up that we can't control. Lord, I pray you'll help us to be faithful, and I pray that for myself and these who are here, that we'll just be faithful in the moment, day by day, moment by moment, doing what you want us to do, being in tune with you in such a way that we can hear what you're saying to us and recognize your call when we are required. So we just ask you to help us to be that. That's not idealistic. It's realistic as we trust you. Lord, I thank you for the story. Thank you for the Word of God. Thank you that we can read this and take from it what is important for us. Help us to just be good stewards of your truth. Lord, as we pray tonight, help us to pray with sincere hearts and use our prayers together as your people in ways that even we can't imagine tonight. We just praise you for that. For those watching, may you encourage and bless folks. Remind them of your presence. We give you praise.